Shalom and welcome to another episode of GMS Mailbag, here to feed the elect through the spirit of Yahweh Shem Shai. I'm going to start with this scripture here, 2 Thessalonians, the 2nd chapter. I'm going to read the 3rd to the 4th verse. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called the Most High, or that is worshipped, so that he as the Most High sitteth in the temple of the Most High, showing himself that he is the Most High. Now, is there an example from history that I can bring that would even explain the scripture even more? Well, one of the first examples of especially the 4th verse is dealing with Serapis, the so-called god that was set up by Ptolemy the First. Ptolemy the First came on the scene, as a matter of fact. Let's bring up Ptolemy the First, also known as Ptolemy Soter, the first king of the ancient Egyptian Ptolemaic dynasty. Now, after the death, he was a boyhood friend of Alexander the Great. And I call him great because he's great in wickedness. He was Alexander the Great's boyhood friend. And after the death of Alexander the Great, he took up rulership over Egypt. Now, the year was about 323 BC. And one of the things that he did was set up his son, which I've read other accounts where it said that he had set up his son, Ptolemy II, to be a god in the form of Serapis. But it was based upon Egyptian worship, as you will see. Let's read this account here. It says he, and as you can see, clearly a so-called white man, Ptolemy I, he sought to consolidate the religions of the Egyptians and Greeks. So it was based upon ancient Egyptian philosophy. It was based upon the ancient Egyptian pharaohs and what they worship. Pharaohs like Ramses I, Ramses II, Seti, during the time of Moses and the Israelites. He sought to consolidate the religions of the Egyptians and Greeks by actually creating the worship of a new god named Serapis. And who did this profoundly affect? Israelites. That's why he created it. He created that god specifically for the Israelites, and he called it Serapis. And we'll go into the name of Serapis in a few. It says, creating the worship of a new god named Serapis, which was in reality a composite deity, a composite meaning two parts being merged into one, or many parts being merged into one, a composite deity made up of both Egyptian and Greek gods, all right, mainly Egyptian, so-called gods. Ptolemy the First established for this god the Serapion, which was a temple. The Serapion was a temple where Serapis was worshipped. It was a so-called magnificent temple. And I'll have to do another lesson focusing on the Serapion and what it entails. But anyway, Ptolemy the First established for this god the Serapion in Alexandria. Now, Alexandria was named after Alexander the Great, Alexander the Greek. And it was located in Egypt, and it was the main hub of the world at that time. All right, and you had a lot of Israelites that was living in Alexandria or Alexandra. And a lot of them became, which we'll go into this term, they became Hellenized. In other words, they became Greeks. Those Israelites, they started worshiping the customs of the Greeks. They forgot about their own customs. They forgot about the laws, statutes, and commandments the Lord had given us, which made us Israelites, and they became Greeks. So essentially they became Hellenized. And the worship of Serapis was one of the examples of them becoming Hellenized. So really that's the beginning of the Israelites worshiping the so-called white man as God in the form of Serapis. Ptolemy the First established for this god the Serapion in Alexandria, a temple dedicated to the god, which also held a daughter library to that of the Great Library of Alexandria. That's another thing that Alexander did. Alexander the Great did. He built a great library, and that library had the works of the different nations, their history, such as the Assyrians, the Assyrian Babylonian, the Egyptians, the Persian, and the Mede empires. All these different empires, their history and their works was located in that library. You could find the history of their works and stuff. You could find it in that library, which Alexander put together. He was also responsible, he being Ptolemy I, he was also responsible for many other temples and temple additions in Egypt, which undoubtedly proved useful with his relationship to Egypt's powerful priesthood. So that the new priesthood, the old priesthood was the different pharaohs of Egypt, such as Seti, Ramses, etc. So when the so-called white man took over in Egypt, he became the new priesthood. As a matter of fact, in 304 BC, Ptolemy I took on the title of Pharaoh of Egypt, and that was in 304 BC. So let's talk about what he did in setting up Serapis as this so-called god. And like I said, he mainly did it for the Israelites to worship, because he knew that our people by nature was a people that needed a god to worship. And that's why he did it, Here's a gallery of different statues and idols of Serapis. As you can see, here's an oil lamp with a bust of Serapis. And you better believe many Israelites living in Alexandria had the same lamp with that bust on it. Kind of reminds you of the Israelites of today now that have pictures of Caesar Borgia on their wall. Well, it's the same thing that was going on back then. Here's another statue with Serapis. Here's a bust. Here's another bust. All right. You better believe Israelites had that in their homes, Israelites that worship or that subscribe, because not all the Israelites subscribed to that philosophy, but many did. And the ones that did, they had these different idols in their homes. And you see an example of it today. Here's another picture of Serapis with the reason why I have this picture here, some call it a flower pot, but that was actually called a modius. And that modius went back to ancient Egypt. It was a pot that held grain. And the reason why, this is on the head of Serapis is because it worships, or it represents, the god of grain, which the Egyptians worship. All right, so clearly you can see that this Serapis character was really based upon Egypt. This pot that he has on his head, it goes back to Egypt. All right, so now the name Serapis was based upon Osiris, as you see here, which was a god that the ancient Egyptians worshipped, and many Israelites as well, wicked Israelites that were in Egypt, worshipped, and Apis the bull. All right, now in the scriptures is also known as calves, and Israel was known for worshiping the calf as a god. As a matter of fact, let's go to the scriptures. This is the book of 2 Kings 17 and 14. It says, notwithstanding they would not hear, but hardened their necks like to the neck of their fathers that did not believe in the Lord their power. And they rejected his statutes and his covenant that he made with their fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and his testimonies which he testified against them, which he did through the prophets. And they followed vanity, another word for vanity is evil, and became vain, and went after the heathen. Now this is during the time of the Assyrian Empire underneath Jeroboam. All right, so it was nothing new underneath the Greek Empire, which is in relevance to the lesson we're bringing out now. And went after the heathen, at that time it was the Assyrian Empire, that were round about them, concerning whom the Lord had changed or had charged them that they should not do like them. And that goes back to the book of Deuteronomy, where the Lord gave the law to our forefather Moses. One of those laws was we were not supposed to, that's in Deuteronomy 7th chapter, we're not supposed to follow after the other nations. The 16th verse, and they left all the commandments of the Lord, their power, and made them molten images, even 2 calves, and made a grove, and worshipped all the hosts of heaven, and served Baal. Now, the point I want to direct your attention to is the calf. All right, made even 2 calves and worshipped them. See? So now, here's an example of the calf, Apis the bull, during the time of the ancient Egyptian empire. So when Ptolemy I, who had the records, when he set up Serapis, Serapis was supposedly patterned after Osiris and Apis the bull. As you will see here, from bull to man. This is from Wikipedia, an excerpt from Wikipedia. It says, under Ptolemy Soter, efforts were made to integrate Egyptian religion with that of their Hellenic rulers. Now, that term Hellenic, you know, basically, when Israel started worshiping the so-called white man as a god, going back to the time of Alexander the Great and even Ptolemy I, that was the beginning of Hellenization. What is Hellenization? Let's read it here. Hellenization is the historical spread of ancient Greek culture or Hellenistic civilization, and to a lesser extent, language over foreign peoples conquered by Greece. What was one of those foreign peoples? The Israelites were conquered by Greece. Alexander the Great, great in wickedness, or in its sphere of influence, particularly during the Hellenistic period. Following the Hellenistic period stretched from 333 BC, when Alexander took over and conquered, all the way to even into the Roman Empire. It stretched, all right, all the way to about 500 AD, 400 and change AD, somewhere around that period. And also what I found out was the worship of Serapis was over 700 years. It really stretched from 323 BC, underneath Ptolemy I, to around 391 AD, with the destruction of the Serapion, which was the temple that was built to Serapis. As a matter of fact, I'd like to thank the brother Caparium from the Toronto camp for this movie called Agora, which I have the trailer here. And it was really based upon the destruction of the Serapeum, which was the temple built to Serapis. I'll play a little bit of this
No, the heavens should be simple.
Movie here.
They are not.
In the last day.
Now, Elder Ramlab had told me about this movie, and I haven't had a chance to watch it, but it fits into our lesson because basically it was centered around the era of the destruction of the Serapion, which was the temple built to house Serapis.
Of the Roman Empire.
See? 391 AD, Alexandria.
At the fall.
Now, let me pause it here. Here you're looking at Serapis, a giant statue of Serapis, which you had many an Israelite would bow down at the base of the statue and worship it. All right. As a matter of fact, here's Serapis, the statue, and behind him is the temple known as the Serapion. All right. So this illustrates our point. Now, if we go into scripture, and that made him Hellenized. You know, that's an example of Hellenization. If we go to the book of 1 Corinthians, the 12th chapter, beginning at the first verse, it says, now concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, this is Paul speaking to the Israelites in Corinth, Greece. This is around 50, maybe 60 AD. So this is still heavy into the period of Serapis worship. And Serapis was one of the main gods that the Israelites worshipped back then. It was very popular, and it stretched from 323 BC to around 391 AD, which was around the destruction of the Serapion, the temple, which that movie Agora was showing you.